Why our ancestors shrunk. The mystery of miniature hominins. The human story, as it is often told in textbooks and popular culture, is a narrative of expansion. It is a story of growing taller, growing smarter, and spreading outward. We visualize the ascent of man as a linear progression from the stooped, ape-like australopithecines to the upright, robust Homo erectus, and finally to the gracile but tall and large-brained Homo sapiens. We associate biological success with physical dominance, viewing our history as a conquest of the environment through increasing stature and cranial capacity. For decades, paleoanthropology operated under the assumption that once the genus Homo evolved, the trajectory was set toward larger bodies and bigger brains. Evolution, we believed, was a mechanism of scaling up. However, the early 21st century brought a discovery that shattered this linear perception of human history. It was a discovery that did not fit the established model, a finding so strange that many scientists initially dismissed it as a pathological anomaly, or a hoax. Deep within a limestone cave on a remote Indonesian island, archaeologists unearthed the remains of a human relative that challenged every rule of thumb we had developed regarding hominin evolution. This creature walked on two legs, made tools, and hunted, yet it stood only about a meter tall and possessed a brain the size of a chimpanzee. This was Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit. Its discovery, followed later by the identification of Homo luzonensis in the Philippines, forced a radical reevaluation of the human family tree. It forced science to confront the reality that our ancestors did not just grow larger and conquer the world. Under certain conditions, they shrank. The mystery of miniature hominins is not merely a curiosity of the fossil record. It is a fundamental window into the mechanics of evolution, the power of isolation, and the incredible plasticity of the human form. To understand why our ancestors shrunk is to understand the biological imperatives that govern life on Earth, revealing that sometimes the best way to survive is to become small. The discovery at Liangbua. The island of Flores in Indonesia is a rugged volcanic landscape, separated from the Asian continental shelf by deep oceanic trenches. It lies east of the Wallace Line, a biogeographical boundary that separates the flora and fauna of Asia from that of Wallacea and Australia. Even during the lowest sea levels of the Pleistocene ice ages, Flores was never connected by land to the mainland. To reach it, any terrestrial animal had to cross a significant expanse of open water. This isolation created a unique evolutionary laboratory, a lost world where the rules of the mainland did not apply. In 2003, a joint team of Indonesian and Australian archaeologists began excavating Liangbua, a large limestone cave in the highlands of western Flores. They were searching for evidence of the first migration of modern humans from Asia to Australia. As they dug through the layers of sediment, moving back through time, they encountered the usual remnants of prehistoric life, including stone tools and animal bones. But at a depth of 6 meters and a layer dating back tens of thousands of years, they struck something unexpected. It was a skeleton, but it was confusingly small. At first glance, it appeared to be the remains of a child. The bones were delicate, the limbs short. However, as the team examined the teeth, they realized they were looking at a fully grown adult. The wisdom teeth were fully erupted and worn, indicating an individual of significant age. Yet the femur was short enough to suggest a standing height of only 106 centimeters, or about 3.5 feet. The skull was even more perplexing. It was tiny, with a capacity of roughly 417 cubic centimeters, comparable to that of an australopithecus or a modern chimpanzee, and less than 1/3 the size of a modern human brain. The specimen, catalogued as LB1, became the holotype for a new species, Homo floresiensis, the implications were staggering. Here was a creature that lived relatively recently, coexisting in time with modern humans, yet it possessed a morphology that seemed to hark back to the earliest days of the hominin lineage. The dating of the sediments initially suggested these creatures had survived until as recently as 12,000 years ago, though subsequent stratigraphic analysis corrected this to closer to 50,000 years ago. Regardless of the specific date, the presence of such a primitive-looking human relative so late in the geological record was a shock to the scientific community. The anatomy of the miniature. To understand the mystery of why these hominins shrunk, we must first understand what they looked like in detail. Homo floresiensis was not simply a scaled-down version of modern man. It was a mosaic of traits, a biological puzzle piece that combined archaic and derived features. The skull of the hobbit is widest at the base, a primitive trait seen in Homo erectus, whereas modern human skulls are widest near the parietal region at the top. It lacks a chin, another archaic feature, and possesses heavy brow ridges. However, the face is relatively small and flat, more like later Homo. The teeth are a mix of large and small, with unique root structures that distinguish them from modern humans. Below the neck, the anatomy tells a story of a body adapted for a specific type of locomotion and life. The arms were relatively long compared to the legs, and the shoulders were shrugged slightly forward, reminiscent of tree-climbing ancestors. The wrist bones were remarkably primitive, shaped more like those of apes than the complex, shock-absorbing wrists of modern humans and Neanderthals. This suggested that while they could make tools, their hands functioned differently from ours. The feet of Homo floresiensis were exceptionally large in proportion to the legs, leading to the hobbit nickname. They were flat, lacking the longitudinal arch that acts as a spring in the modern human stride. This implies that while they were bipedal, they were not efficient long-distance runners. They likely walked with a slightly high-stepping gait. These physical characteristics painted a picture of a species that had evolved in isolation, retaining ancient traits while developing new adaptations for its island home. The most contentious feature, however, was the brain. In the study of human evolution, the brain is the expensive tissue. It consumes a massive amount of energy. The trend in human evolution had always been toward larger brains, which facilitated complex social behavior, language, and tool use. The brain of LB1 was shockingly small. Could a creature with such a small brain make the stone tools found in the same cave layers? The tools were sophisticated enough to strip meat from bones, and there was evidence of fire use in the cave. This challenged the long-held belief that a large brain was a prerequisite for complex cultural behavior. It suggested that neural architecture and internal organization might be more important than sheer volume. The island rule and the biology of shrinking. To explain the existence of Homo floresiensis, biologists turn to a principle known as the island rule, or Foster's rule. Formulated by J. Bristol Foster in 1964, this ecogeographical rule states that members of a species get smaller or bigger depending on the resources available in the environment. On the mainland, species are subject to intense pressure from predators and competition from other species. Being large is often an advantage. It provides protection against predators, allows for longer travel distances to find food, and helps in retaining body heat. However, being large also comes with a significant cost. Large bodies require large amounts of calories to maintain. They take longer to reach reproductive maturity and reproduce more slowly. When a population becomes isolated on an island, the rules of the game change. Islands typically have fewer resources than the mainland. There's less space, less food, and often a limited variety of prey. However, islands are also frequently free of large mammalian predators. If a species arrives on an island and finds itself without the constant threat of predation, the selective pressure to be large for defense is removed. In this context, being large becomes a disadvantage. A large body requires more food in an environment where food is scarce. A population of large individuals is more likely to starve and go extinct during a famine or a drought. Conversely, smaller individuals require fewer calories to survive and reproduce. They can thrive on more limited resources. Over many generations, natural selection drives the population toward a smaller body size. This is known as insular dwarfism. We see this phenomenon repeatedly in the fossil record and in living species. The geological history of the Mediterranean islands is littered with the bones of pygmy elephants and hippos that shrunk after being isolated. On the island of Flores itself, the excavation team found the remains of stegodon, an extinct relative of the elephant. The mainland stegodon was a massive beast, but the species found on Flores had evolved into a dwarf form, standing only about shoulder height to a modern human. Homo floresiensis appears to be a primate example of this same phenomenon. If a population of hominins, perhaps Homo erectus, arrived on Flores, they would have faced a resource-constrained environment with no large mammalian carnivores, though giant reptiles were present. The pressure to maintain a large, metabolically expensive body and brain would have vanished. Instead, selection would have favored those who could survive on less. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the population shrank, shedding the expensive biological machinery that was no longer necessary for survival. The controversy of pathology. The hypothesis of insular dwarfism was elegant and fit the ecological data, but it was not immediately accepted by everyone. Following the announcement of the discovery, a fierce scientific debate erupted. Some prominent anthropologists argued that LB1 was not a new species at all, but a modern human with a pathological condition. These critics pointed to the extremely small brain size, arguing that it was too small to be the result of evolutionary dwarfism alone. While bodies shrink on islands, brains usually shrink less, a phenomenon known as mosaic reduction. The brain of LB1 seemed to have shrunk too much. Skeptics suggested that the individual suffered from microcephaly, a condition where the brain fails to develop properly. Others proposed Laron syndrome, a form of dwarfism caused by an insensitivity to growth hormone, or endemic cretinism resulting from iodine deficiency. For years, papers were published back and forth. The pathology proponents analyzed the skull asymmetry and claimed it fit the profile of various diseases. The discovery team countered with analyses of the wrist bones, the shoulder structure, and the leg proportions, arguing that no known modern human disease produces the specific combination of archaic skeletal features found in the hobbit. A microcephalic modern human would still have a modern chin and modern wrist bones. LB1 did not. The debate was eventually settled by the discovery of more fossils. Additional mandibles, teeth, and postcranial bones were found at Liangbua, all showing the same diminutive traits. It was statistically impossible for an entire population to suffer from the exact same rare genetic pathology over thousands of years. Furthermore, the discovery of much older fossils at a site called Matamenge, also on Flores, confirmed that these small hominins had been present on the island for at least 700,000 years. This deep lineage proved that the small stature was a long-term evolutionary adaptation, not a disease of a single individual. Homo luzonensis and the pattern of the islands. Just as the scientific community was coming to terms with the reality of Homo floresiensis, another surprise emerged from the island Southeast Asia region. In 2019, researchers announced the discovery of a new species of small hominin in the Philippines, Homo luzonensis. Found in Callao Cave on the island of Luzon, these fossils were dated to between 50,000 and 67,000 years ago. Like Flores, Luzon is an island that has never been connected to the mainland, even during low sea levels. It is effectively a bioevolutionary fortress surrounded by deep water. The remains of Homo luzonensis were fragmentary, consisting primarily of teeth, finger bones, and toe bones. But they told a remarkably similar story to that of the hobbit. The teeth were small and possessed a mix of primitive and derived features. The molars were extremely small, even smaller than those of Homo floresiensis. Most shockingly, the toe bones were curved, a primitive trait usually associated with the tree-climbing australopithecines of Africa, dating back millions of years. The discovery of Homo luzonensis confirmed that the hobbit was not a fluke. It demonstrated that insular dwarfism in hominins was a repeatable evolutionary experiment. When humans or their ancestors entered these isolated island environments, they were subject to the same ecological laws as elephants and deer. The constraints of the island forced a reshaping of the human blueprint. The existence of two distinct lineages of dwarf hominins in the same region raises profound questions about the migration and dispersal of early humans. It suggests that the seas of Southeast Asia were not a barrier, but a filter and a forge, creating pockets of isolation where unique human experiments could unfold. The ancestor question: who shrank? One of the central mysteries remaining is the identity of the ancestor that gave rise to these miniature species. Did a large Homo erectus arrive on the islands and shrink? Or did a smaller, more primitive ancestor, perhaps one we have not yet identified in Asia, arrive and simply stay small? The prevailing theory for a long time was the dwarfing of Homo erectus. Homo erectus is known to have been present in Southeast Asia, Java man, for over 1 million years. They were robust, large-brained, and capable of crossing open water, at least over short distances. The model suggests that a population of Homo erectus became stranded on Flores, perhaps after a tsunami or on a drifting raft of vegetation. Once isolated, the island rule took effect, and over millennia they transformed into Homo floresiensis. However, the anatomical data presents complications for this theory. Homo floresiensis possesses traits that are more primitive than Homo erectus. The structure of the wrist, the proportions of the limbs, and the shape of the pelvis bear similarities to Homo habilis or even Australopithecus, species that lived in Africa and are not thought to have left that continent. This has led some researchers to propose a more radical hypothesis: that a pre-erectus hominin migrated out of Africa and reached Southeast Asia. This hypothetical ancestor would have been small-bodied and primitive to begin with. If this is true, it would rewrite the history of the first human dispersal. It would mean that the famous out-of-Africa migration of Homo erectus was not the first, but perhaps the second or third wave, preceded by smaller, more archaic pioneers who left no trace on the mainland but survived in the isolation of the islands. The recent discovery of stone tools in China and other parts of Asia that predate the standard arrival of Homo erectus adds weight to the possibility of an earlier, cryptic migration. If a primitive, small-bodied hominin arrived on Flores, it might not have needed to shrink much. It simply adapted to the island life. However, the dwarfing of Homo erectus remains the most parsimonious explanation given the extensive evidence of erectus in the region and the lack of habilis-like fossils in Asia. The primitive traits could be evolutionary reversals, atavisms that re-emerged as the body reshaped itself for a different ecological niche. The cognitive paradox. The small brain of the miniature hominins poses a challenge to our understanding of intelligence. For roughly 2 million years, the archaeological record shows a correlation between brain size and technological complexity. Yet, the tools associated with Homo floresiensis are not primitive. They include flakes, cores, and retouched points. The evidence suggests they hunted cooperative prey, such as the pygmy stegodon, and had to contend with the fearsome Komodo dragon. How could a brain the size of a chimpanzee's perform tasks usually associated with much larger brains? The answer likely lies in the internal structure of the brain. Brain size is a rough proxy for intelligence, but it is not the only factor. The density of neurons, the number of connections between them, and the specific enlargement of certain association areas are crucial. Recent scans of the interior of the LB1 skull endocasts reveal that while the brain was small, it was highly organized. The frontal lobes associated with planning and problem-solving were complex. The temporal lobes involved in memory and language processing were relatively large. This suggests that under evolutionary pressure to reduce size, the brain reorganized itself to maintain essential cognitive functions. It shed volume but kept the high-performance wiring. This efficiency challenges the human ego. It implies that we do not need a 1,350 cc brain to be smart, capable, and human. A much smaller package, efficiently wired, can sustain a complex existence. It raises the question of why modern humans have such large brains if a smaller one can do the job. The answer may be that our large brains are evolved for social complexity, language, and abstract culture on a scale that the island dwellers did not require. Or perhaps the island dwellers were far more capable than we give them credit for. The Lost World of Flores. To fully appreciate the life of the miniature hominins, we must visualize their environment. The ecosystem of Flores during the Pleistocene was a place of strange proportions, an Alice in Wonderland world where the small became big and the big became small. While the elephants and humans shrank, other creatures grew. In the absence of large mammalian carnivores like lions or wolves, reptiles and birds took over the role of top predators. The island was home to the Komodo dragon and other even larger extinct monitor lizards. These giant reptiles would have been a constant threat to the tiny hominins. The skies were patrolled by Leptoptelos robustus, a giant marabou stork that stood nearly 1.8 meters tall. This bird was taller than the hobbit and possessed a massive, heavy beak. It was likely a ground hunter, and a young or infirm Homo floresiensis would have been potential prey. The presence of such a formidable avian predator adds a terrifying dimension to their daily existence. But the island also offered abundance. The giant rats of Flores, still existing today, provided a source of protein. The pygmy stegodon, though smaller than mainland elephants, was still a substantial animal, weighing several hundred kilograms. Hunting such a beast would have required cooperation, planning, and weapons. The cut marks found on stegodon bones in the Liangbua cave are a testament to the hobbit's ability to master this dangerous landscape. This ecosystem was dynamic. Volcanic eruptions frequently coated the island in ash, altering the vegetation and stressing the animal populations. The resilience of Homo floresiensis is evident in their survival through these geological upheavals for hundreds of thousands of years. They were not a fragile evolutionary mistake. They were a robust, adapted species perfectly tuned to their unique environment. The end of the miniatures. Why are they not here today? If they were so well adapted, what caused their extinction? The most recent dating evidence suggests that Homo floresiensis disappeared from Liangbua around 50,000 years ago. This date is suspiciously close to the time when modern humans, Homo sapiens, arrived in Southeast Asia and Australia. The coincidence is hard to ignore. Everywhere modern humans went during the Pleistocene, the megafauna, and apparently the mini-hominins, disappeared. We are a species that competes intensely for resources. We are efficient hunters and landscape modifiers. It is highly probable that the arrival of modern humans on Flores disrupted the delicate balance of the island ecosystem. We may have competed with them for the same prey, such as the stegodon and the giant rats. We may have introduced new diseases to which they had no immunity, or the interaction may have been more direct and violent. In local folklore on Flores, there are legends of the Ibu Gogo, small, hairy, forest-dwelling creatures that murmured to each other and stole food from villages. While scientists are cautious about linking myths to fossils, the stories describe the villagers hunting down and exterminating the Ibu Gogo in caves. Whether these legends preserve a cultural memory of an actual encounter or are simply coincidental, they reflect the likely grim reality of what happens when two human species occupy the same territory. Volcanic activity may have also played a role. A major eruption occurred around the time of their disappearance, depositing a thick layer of ash in the cave. It is possible that a combination of ecological collapse caused by a volcanic winter and the pressure from incoming modern humans drove the population to extinction. Implications for the definition of human. The existence of miniature hominins forces us to broaden our definition of what it means to be human. For centuries, Western science defined humanity by a specific set of physical and intellectual benchmarks: tall stature, large brain, language, and civilization. Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis defy these benchmarks. They were undeniably part of the human clade, yet they followed a completely different biological trajectory. They show us that human is not a singular destination, it is a spectrum. Evolution is not a ladder, it is a branching bush. Some branches grow tall and thick, while others grow small and winding. Both are successful strategies. The miniature hominins were not failed humans. They were successful island humans. They survived for significantly longer than modern humans have currently existed. Their existence also highlights the role of plasticity in our DNA. The genetic toolkit of the genus Homo contains the potential for rapid and dramatic morphological change. Given the right environmental triggers, the human body can reshape itself in surprisingly short order, evolutionarily speaking. This challenges the notion of the human form as a static or finished product. We are, like all life, a work in progress, molded by the world we live in. The search continues. The story of the miniature hominins is far from over. The islands of Southeast Asia, Sulawesi, Timor, the Philippines, and the thousands of islands in the Indonesian archipelago remain largely unexplored by paleoanthropologists. If Flores and Luzon could harbor distinct species, it is statistically probable that other islands did as well. There may be other hobbits waiting to be found. There may be islands where hominins evolved into giants, or developed other bizarre adaptations we cannot yet imagine. The continental shelves that were exposed during the ice ages, now submerged under the sea, likely served as highways for these populations, and their settlements may now lie underwater. Current research is also focusing on proteomics and ancient DNA. While the tropical climate is notoriously bad for preserving DNA, new techniques are allowing scientists to extract proteins from tooth enamel, which is more durable. If we can sequence the proteins of Homo floresiensis, we could finally resolve its place on the family tree and settle the debate about its ancestry. The legacy of the little people. The mystery of why our ancestors shrunk is a lesson in humility. It reminds us that we are not the inevitable masters of the planet, but one expression of a diverse lineage. The miniature hominins demonstrate that intelligence and survival do not require physical dominance. They show that evolution is a creative and unpredictable force, capable of sculpting life into forms that defy our expectations. When we look at the skeleton of the hobbit, We are looking at a mirror that reflects a different possibility for humankind. We see a version of ourselves that took the path of modesty, living within the constraints of a small island, navigating a world of giants with a small but capable mind. They are the ghosts in our family tree, the small shadows that remind us that bigger is not always better, and that the history of our species is far stranger and more wonderful than we ever dared to imagine. Detailed analysis of the skeletal evidence. To truly grasp the scientific weight of the Flores findings, we must delve deeper into the specific osteological paradoxes that define the initial study of LB1. The pelvic girdle of Homo floresiensis is markedly different from modern Homo sapiens. It is wide and flared, a shape that biomechanically supports the internal organs but alters the leverage of the leg muscles. In modern humans, the pelvis is bowl-shaped and narrower to support efficient bipedal running. The hobbit's pelvis indicates a creature that was fully bipedal but lacked the endurance running capabilities that allowed Homo erectus to hunt via persistence predation on the savannas. This suggests a different hunting strategy, perhaps reliant on ambush and short bursts of activity in the dense tropical forests of Flores. Furthermore, the humeral torsion, the twist in the upper arm bone, is much lower in Homo floresiensis than in modern humans. This lower torsion aligns the elbow differently, giving them stronger leverage for pulling motions. Combined with the robust cortical bone thickness, this suggests immense upper body strength relative to their size. These were not frail creatures, they were compact powerhouses, likely capable of climbing and grappling with a vigor that would shame a modern human of equal height. The robusticity of the long bones is a common trait in archaic hominins, indicating a lifestyle that placed high mechanical loads on the skeleton. The mandibles found at Liangbua also offer critical clues. They lack the chin, a bony prominence that is unique to Homo sapiens. The symphysis, the point where the two halves of the jaw meet, is reinforced with internal buttressing, similar to the simian shelf seen in apes and early hominins. This reinforcement serves to counteract the high twisting forces generated by large chewing muscles. The teeth, while small, show complex wear patterns. Analysis of the microwear, microscopic scratches and pits on the enamel, indicates a diet that was tough and abrasive. They were chewing fibrous plant material, raw meat, and perhaps processing food with their teeth, in a way modern humans do not. The chronological context and dating revisions. The timeline of The Hobbit has been a subject of intense scrutiny and revision. Initially, the charcoal found near the fossils was radiocarbon dated to around 12,000 to 18,000 years ago. This startlingly recent date was the primary driver of the initial skepticism. It seemed impossible for such an archaic human to survive until the dawn of agriculture. However, in 2016, a comprehensive reevaluation of the site stratigraphy revealed a complex geological history. The Liangbua is an active cave system. Water flows through it, eroding old layers and depositing new ones. The researchers discovered that the layer containing the hobbit bones had been cut into by a younger surface, creating a confusing unconformity. The original samples had been taken from this younger, intrusive layer. When the team dated the actual sediments encasing the fossils using argon-argon dating and uranium series dating, the age was pushed back to between 100,000 and 60,000 years ago. While this removed the living with farmers aspect of the mystery, it did not diminish the significance of the find. Surviving until 50,000 or 60,000 years ago still places Homo floresiensis squarely in the time of Neanderthals and the expanding wave of Homo sapiens. It means that for the vast majority of human history, we were not alone. We shared the planet with other distinct human species. The revision also aligned the extinction of the hobbit more closely with the arrival of modern humans in the region, reinforcing the theory of competitive exclusion, metabolic scaling, and the energy budget. The biological imperative to shrink on islands is driven fundamentally by thermodynamics. An organism's metabolic rate, the amount of energy it burns just to stay alive, scales with its body mass. However, it does not scale linearly. It scales to the power of roughly 0.75, Kleiber's law. This means that while a smaller animal burns less total energy than a large one, it burns more energy per gram of tissue. For a population of hominins trapped on an island, the total energy available in the ecosystem is the hard limit. If the population is to survive, it must stay below the carrying capacity of the island. A population of 500 large individuals might consume the same resources as a population of 1,000 small individuals. However, a population of 500 is dangerously close to the genetic danger zone, where inbreeding and stochastic events, like a volcanic eruption, can lead to extinction. A population of 1,000 small individuals is more genetically robust. Therefore, natural selection on islands maximizes the number of individuals by minimizing the size of each individual. This allows the population to maintain enough genetic diversity to avoid inbreeding depression while staying within the calorie budget of the island. For Homo floresiensis, shrinking from a 60 to 70 kilograms Homo erectus to a 25 to 30 kilograms hobbit would have drastically reduced the caloric needs of each person, allowing the tribe to sustain a higher population density in the limited area of Flores. This metabolic scaling also affected the brain. Brain tissue is metabolically expensive, consuming about 20% of the body's energy in modern humans. In a calorie-restricted environment, a large brain is a liability. Unless the extra computing power provides a direct and immediate survival benefit that outweighs its caloric cost, selection will favor a smaller, more efficient brain. The hobbit represents the equilibrium point of this equation. The smallest possible brain capable of maintaining the necessary survival behaviors: tool-making, hunting, biogeography, and the Wallace Line. The presence of hominins on Flores challenges our understanding of ancient seafaring. Flores lies east of the Wallace Line. This deep-water channel runs between Bali and Lombok, and between Borneo and Sulawesi. It marks a zone where the continental shelf ends and the deep ocean begins. To cross the Wallace Line, one must cross open ocean, where land is not visible on the other side. Zoologists have long noted that while birds and some reptiles cross this line, large terrestrial mammals rarely do. The fauna of Flores is impoverished because very few animals made the crossing. The presence of hominins implies they either had watercraft or were subject to accidental rafting events of extraordinary luck. The rafting hypothesis suggests that tsunamis, common in this tectonically active region, could have swept vegetation and trees out to sea, carrying stranded animals and early humans with them. If a small group survived such a journey and washed up on Flores, they would become the founders of the new population. This is the founder effect, a genetic bottleneck that immediately differentiates the island population from the mainland source. However, some researchers argue that the repeated colonization of islands, Flores, Luzon, Sulawesi, suggests that this was not accidental. They propose that early hominins like Homo erectus might have had rudimentary boat-building skills, perhaps lashing bamboo together. If true, this would push the origins of maritime technology back by hundreds of thousands of years. While no physical evidence of boats exists, wood rots, the presence of the fossils themselves is the strongest argument for some form of water-crossing capability. The psychological impact on modern science. The discovery of Homo floresiensis was a humiliation for the anthropocentric view of the universe. It forced scientists to abandon the idea that humanity is a singular, special destiny. It showed that we are subject to the same biological laws as field mice. Before 2003, the prevailing view was the single-species hypothesis, which suggested that because humans occupy such a broad ecological niche, only one species of human could exist on Earth at a time. Culture, it was thought, acts as an ecological buffer that prevents speciation. We don't adapt our bodies, we adapt our tools. The Hobbit proved this wrong. It showed that culture does not stop biology. Even with tools and fire, isolation and environmental pressure will reshape the human body. This realization has opened the floodgates for re-examining other odd fossils. Bones found in China, previously dismissed as variations of Homo erectus or Homo sapiens, are now being scrutinized for signs of distinct speciation. The Red Deer Cave people of southwest China, for example, show a mix of archaic and modern traits that might represent another localized evolutionary experiment. The future of the field lies in the islands. The Indonesian archipelago contains over 17,000 islands. Only a tiny fraction has been explored by archaeologists. The limestone karst formations that dominate many of these islands are perfect for preserving bone. It is almost a certainty that Liangbua and Kalau Cave are not unique. Future excavations will likely reveal a panoply of island hominins. We might find populations that specialized in fishing and swimming, or populations that retained even more arboreal traits. We might find that the history of humanity in Southeast Asia is a history of repeated colonization, isolation, dwarfing, and extinction, a churning evolutionary froth that produced a diversity of human forms unparalleled anywhere else on Earth. The mystery of the miniature hominins is the mystery of potential. It is the story of what happens when the human blueprint is given a blank canvas and a set of strict constraints. It teaches us that the human form we possess today is not the inevitable climax of evolution, but merely the last survivor of a vast and varied family, a family that once included giants, dwarves, and everything in between. As we continue to dig, we do not just find bones. We find the lost chapters of our own biography, revealing a past that is richer, stranger, and more humbling than we ever knew. In conclusion, the phenomenon of shrinking ancestors is a testament to the adaptability of the genus Homo. Through the lens of Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis, we see that the march of progress is a myth. Evolution is not a march, it is a dance with the environment. When the music changed on the isolated islands of the East, our ancestors changed their steps. They became smaller, more efficient, and in doing so, they survived for eons. In a world that would have starved a giant, their silence now is only physical. Scientifically, they speak volumes about the resilience and plasticity of life. The Hobbit is dead, but the lesson of the Hobbit is immortal. In the game of survival, size is nothing. Adaptation is everything.